almost rhyming. So let's try it again. Try it again.
Welcome to Winding Down with Father Padre. Gosh.
That's so old.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to... Wait, now I don't even remember.
Father Mike.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. What are we drinking tonight?
Whew. I intentionally did not try to pronounce this so that you guys can hear me try to pronounce it. And I still don't even know what I'm going to say. This is French. Clos la Cotal.
Clos le Cotel. Cahors. That's what we're drinking. Clos le Cotel.
I think our sommelier...
But how about this? The Miss in Boutil à la propriété. He is going to be so disappointed in us. But it's imported by Kermit Lynch. He might be related to Kermit the Frog.
Boutellier.
I doubt it.
Well, I can make it sound really fancy. Miss in Boutellier.
Just because you're making weird facial expressions that make me uncomfortable right now doesn't mean that you're a sommelier. All right.
I know it's an accent.
How would y'all pronounce this?
So our sommelier, who's been providing us with some wines to fit our topics.
Ooh, it's a Malbec.
I think he's like intentionally trying to
choose wines that we won't be able to pronounce.
Absolutely.
So 80% Malbec and 20% Merlot. Oh. So that's pretty good. So what does it taste like?
It's en français.
It's definitely French, and you know the French language never makes sense when they write it out.
Ooh. So okay,
spicy.
Earthy. Okay, do you taste the earthy?
That was like a garden.
I've always
that really was earthy. It's like tasted like soil.
Like okay, dirt,
but spicy soil.
Ooh. Spicy
okay,
soil?
Our sommelier usually gives us notes. I think either he forgot or we lost the notes. I don't know.
I feel really confident with the earthy.
I'm going to go with earthy. So,
rocks. See, let's stick with the rocks and the clay. Spicy clay.
Oh, like a riverbed of rocks?
That's for Joe, little Joe.
Baby Joe. All right. Joe. So, we're on a new series tonight.
Yeah, I'm excited about this new series.
That was like 3 minutes of nonsense. People are probably like, really? What's going on?
They expect nonsense.
Okay, so we're on a new series. This one is completely different than well, maybe not so different, but still.
Yeah.
Quite a different tone and pace than our previous series. But still kind of a challenging topic.
Pretty heavy.
A heavy topic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what our last series was more controversial. This one's just heavy.
Right. Yeah, and I think that what inspired this series is... I know we were praying, you were praying, and just where are people, where are we? Like in this time of COVID, we just hear and see a lot of suffering in people. And just some suffering on our own end. Just
we
with
didn't
the
announce.
change of pace.
Is that what the series is? We didn't announce it.
Oh.
What's it called?
Do you want like a
Suffering Matters.
table roll?
No, I've already said it. Suffering Matters.
Oh, okay. There you go.
It's our preaching series. It's a 3-week preaching series on suffering.
Absolutely.
And now I'll cut you off. We were praying.
Yeah, and just inspired of, hey, how do we help people journey through and walk in this season of suffering for a lot of people in a healthy way, you know? Mm-hmm. So I'm excited. And we've kind of...
we're using a book.
Some of you have seen the advertisement for the book that will kind of accompany this series.
Yes, but if you haven't gotten it yet, it's not too late.
Yeah, by Dr. Bob Schutz, called Real Suffering. We'll put all these things in the notes, hopefully.
So we've seen Bob Schutz before.
We have. Great, good memory. When did we see him?
Actually, I've never seen him personally, but I have read a book by him before. Recently, this past Lent. What was it?
Be Healed.
Oh yeah, Be Healed. Be Healed.
Yes, the Lenten series we had on just internal healing.
Yeah. So anyway, great book on suffering, and in here he goes through different aspects of suffering. We have physical suffering, we have emotional suffering, and spiritual suffering. So much of his insights and research is kind of what's been our main source for our homily series.
Right. And I'm glad he kind of broke those down into three. For those of you who kind of listened to our homily this past weekend, you heard us talk about one aspect of suffering, which is physical suffering. we figured that would probably be the suffering that most people could directly relate to, because we all at some point in our life have experienced some type of physical suffering.
What is, give me an example of a way in which you physically suffered in your life once, big or small.
Great. Well, super cheesy, easy. Sixth grade, broke my thumb playing football. Went in for a tackle.
Wow.
Like some helmet hit directly on my thumb, and it was like just piercing pain. Couldn't feel it. Knew something was wrong. Went to the sidelines. Coach was like, "Have a seat." Went to the doctor. Broken cast. So, just one example. You had an example this week.
I have never broken any bones before, which is amazing because I played sports all my life, but somehow I've been very lucky. So I don't know what that experience is like. But my twice a year physical suffering, it's just the absolute worst. Dr. Mike, I know you're watching.
He's such a gentleman.
He is the best, but still, nonetheless, is my appointment to the dentist office the worst.
Gosh.
Does anybody actually like the dentist office? I mean, like, those tools and sounds and feelings that all happen all up in there, it's just not a good experience.
Okay, but probably it's your dental hygienist that goes in there and cleans.
And I'll tell you, she's very good. She's very thorough. But that's exactly what hurts.
So does she use the water pick, like the high pressure water pick?
She did that.
The
both.
Oh.
She did everything. The scraping, it's like nails on a chalkboard. It's just
Don't you feel
I'll tell you though, like gross? I feel like I have new teeth leaving the place, but the experience. So it was a purifying experience. It was redeeming, but oh goodness. So anyway, kind of cheesy, but it really is a moment of like, okay, you just got to get through this and surrender to this suffering that you can't control. And yet some people love the dentist. I still don't understand it.
I brush my teeth like twice a day, and then I go there and I feel
you
like
floss when you drive.
Yeah, and I feel like, am I even doing any good? Because they're scraping stuff.
No, but you floss when you drive, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is gross. What do you just swallow?
I love that.
You just swallow your plaque?
It's all protein. Gross. It's all protein.
That's how you clog arteries, bro.
Hey.
Yeah.
Well, I have a will.
And a way. Okay, it's time for us to actually talk about something substantial.
Wow. Okay, so maybe some framework for us to enter into this conversation of suffering that might help us, because there can be some misconceptions, and I think around suffering that we want to maybe avoid, or maybe have at least a framework or a lens through which we have this conversation. So Dr. Bob Schutz has some wonderful quotes here in the book that might help us frame our conversation. One of them is this idea of suffering that is not transformed is transmitted.
Okay, tell me more. What you mean by that?
Yeah, so hurt people, right? So this idea of, if I am hurt, maybe someone hurts me, or I am just hurt by life, whether that's, we're going to get into physical suffering, emotional, spiritual suffering. If that suffering that is brought upon me or that happens to me is not transformed, in other words, if it's not healed, or if it's not redeemed, all these big words that we're going to talk about, the meaning of them, then very often I end up hurting other people the way that I have been hurt. Just because of my anger, my frustration, my bitterness. I'll stub my toe, let's say, walking out the door, and I just get angry. And very often I might stay in that level of anger, and then the next person I see, I'll let them have the anger that I'm sitting in. Mm-hmm. And so if I don't know what to do with that anger, then I'll often hurt someone else with that anger. And so me being hurt, I end up transmitting that hurt to other people, and I end up hurting them. And that can be said for so many things. We hear this all the time, and we're going to get into some sensitive topics, as we go on. Just abuse people who have maybe been abused when they were younger. If they don't work through that, if they don't go to counseling and just kind of allow maybe some healing to happen, very often they will abuse other people, and that's just a fact. So just that lens of, as we talk about suffering, there's hope. We're going to be talking about hope, but
Yeah, there's something to say about we are all invited to experience transformation through suffering. And if we don't transform through it, then very often we will transmit it instead. And so we don't want to transmit more suffering. Suffering comes from ultimately the original source of suffering is from original sin. I mean, back in the book of Genesis. And every type of suffering, physical, emotional, spiritual, is either directly or at least indirectly somehow related to sin. And so we can talk more about that, but the idea is there is hope and there is healing. We don't have to stay here forever. Instead, we can find a transformative experience. And when we say transformative, we really mean discover Jesus in it and discover real freedom through it. So, but I find that sometimes in Catholic culture we just get a little confused on the distinctions and the right posture with suffering, because sometimes you'll hear Catholics say that they love suffering, and in one sense what they might mean is what they love is redemptive suffering, but in another sense that might confuse some people. So maybe like how can we make sense of like is suffering ever good? Is evil ever okay?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe a second principle that we want to talk about is we don't ever look for suffering, and we don't go looking for experiencing physical pain just for its sake. I can remember like growing up, I was very aware, like you were saying earlier, that gosh, I want to be united to Jesus, but I haven't really had a whole lot of physical suffering. Like I don't know what the cross is like. And so I would like try to create my own crosses, you know. I would like try to fast, but not fasting for a gift and offering to God. It was just to make myself miserable so that I knew what misery felt like. And I almost began to like resent the misery that I was putting myself in. And it was totally disconnected from the life of God and my relationship with Him. It was just seeking suffering for suffering's sake, so that I can say,
so you can compare your suffering to others, and
yeah, so that I had a feel of suffering, and
so you could be tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it did was I was such like a miserable person. Like I wasn't happy. It wasn't full of joy, and that is not at all like the Christian experience of what we're going to be talking about with redemptive suffering, right? So
I think a better way to say it then is it's not that we don't look for suffering, it's that we don't look for evil. Because when we look for evil, because what you're saying is suffering for suffering's sake. So you're talking about evil. Like I'm going to look for just evil things, and just so that I can conquer it on my own terms. We don't look for evil, and we don't even rejoice in evil. There's nothing good about evil. However, we do rejoice and look for opportunities to overcome evil with good. And so, yeah, we, in a sense, you could say, arguably, that we look for suffering. We need to know where it's at so that we can then redeem it. So if you don't acknowledge that you really are suffering, then you're in denial. So we got to look for it. But when we find it, we got to give it to Jesus. We got to experience that redemption. So we're not looking for evil and just pure pain just so that we can pridefully be tough. We are, whenever someone might say casually that they look for suffering, a better way for what they should say instead is they're looking for redemptive suffering. They're looking for opportunities to overcome evil with good, to discover Jesus and hope and healing through circumstances that may not be good.
yeah, well said.
So that's kind of a framework too. I mean, it's a hard distinction, but yeah, at the end of the day, we don't rejoice in bad things because they're bad. No, I mean, obviously not. But we do rejoice in the cross because Jesus redeemed the cross.
Yeah, He entered into suffering. The most like horrific suffering, and he transformed it. He transformed the meaning of it.
And didn't even just transform it, just, dealt like neutrally dealt with something that was bad over here. He requires that we enter into heaven through the cross.
Mm-hmm.
It's by death that we enter into life. And so it doesn't mean that we have to experience every type of death that we enter into life. And so it doesn't mean that we have to experience every type of physical, emotional, and spiritual pain in order to get to heaven. Of course not. But he did say that the way that we get there, like the road traveled, is going to be marked by experiences of difficulty and challenge and suffering. So we can expect that in our life, in other words.
Yeah, and I think maybe the third thing that you brought out on page 13 in Dr. Bob's book is suffering clears the way for grace. Whereas rather than experiencing suffering in a traumatic way, we can actually experience suffering in a transforming way. So I know for me, the experience of suffering really forces me into a choice of self-sufficiency or selfishness versus selflessness. Like I'm either going to withdraw into myself or come out of myself. And this idea of trauma, it's something done against me and to me, and it like ends in me, versus this idea of, well, there's always grace active in any suffering, where I can enter into that grace offered by God to pull me out of myself, like to be a choice of love. Like, that's the transforming element of it.
Absolutely. And it's so important that distinction between trauma and what was the other T word? Transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is to say that it's not automatic. Just
Right.
because you suffer greatly does not mean that you are automatically, experiencing the doorway to heaven, or that you are automatically now a really holy person or whatever. Like, it doesn't mean that, like, what it does mean is that you have an opportunity to make a choice. This will either remain traumatic, or you can be transformed through it and by God's grace. But you're absolutely right. I think it must have been John Paul II that said that. Yeah. On page 12 of Dr. Schutz's book, he quotes John Paul II, who wrote a long encyclical, a church document on suffering, and his quote.
He says this: "It is suffering more than anything else which clears the way for the grace which transforms human souls. Suffering more than anything else makes present in the history of humanity the powers of the redemption."
Yeah, it's true, and I think that's why, like, there is such a. I mean, you mentioned fasting and kind of some of your learning experiences through fasting, but that would make sense to me why fasting is part of the church tradition, even all the way back to Jesus fasting in the desert for 40 years. That there is that experience of physical discomfort, and there's something about that when done right and under, obviously, with prudence and safely and all that. There's something about that, though, that it makes you realize that you are not the most powerful person in the world, and that you're not in control of your life and all these things. That instead, it kind of opens you up to grace and to God's action in your own heart. So it would make sense that, it's these small discomforts. Just because I haven't broken a bone doesn't mean I haven't experienced discomfort. And in these discomforts, I can become bratty and just complain all the time and always be negative about it. Or I can welcome these discomforts with joy by saying, Lord, these discomforts remind me that I'm created for you, that one day these discomforts won't be here anymore, and instead you're inviting me to turn to you in this moment, et cetera, but to be transformed by it.
Yeah, so let's maybe verbalize like just some physical sufferings of people, like lately in this time of COVID. I know there have been some people who have literally had the virus and have suffered physically. They've either they've been quarantined and had the physical struggle with breathing, or they've been to the hospital. Some physical suffering, and I know this may be small, and just wearing masks. I know it's a huge political hot button of some people are, look, I don't mind wearing masks for the greater good of the whole, and some are like, this is so bogus. But the point of, you know what, regardless of the political climate of what you think about a mask, there's a point of, you know what, I'm either going to view this physical discomfort of wearing a mask as just a physical suffering and an obstacle to my experiencing joy of life, or like I've heard like a redemptive quality of, you know what, if this, regardless of my political view, if this actually helps someone else and it's a sacrifice to me, and like this is an expression of love, then I'll take on this suffering, the discomfort of wearing a mask, and it's like it's like an act of love, and like, so I'm freed from it, you know.
Yeah, or even just I mean, even that itself is still a political statement, kind of. So, I mean, even outside of that, you can just say, those people that say, it's uncomfortable, I don't like wearing it. Okay, regardless of whether it is actually effective or not, we're not going there. But it's uncomfortable, and I'm required to wear it. So I can complain about it, or I can rejoice that the Lord has given me an opportunity to give him a discomfort. And as I give him that discomfort, Lord, that's a powerful prayer, because I'm not just saying a word. I'm giving you like my whole self in this moment, because I'm uncomfortable and I don't enjoy wearing this.
Yep.
And so it's just a whole different attitude, but there's spiritual effects. Like whenever even a small thing, I mean, goodness, yesterday I went to Chick-fil-A. Just talking, I go to another fast food restaurant.
Listen,
went to Chick-fil-A,
I have let go of his dietary habits and patterns that he either hides or doesn't hide at this point in the game.
Okay, so yesterday I went to Chick-fil-A, and they're so efficient, awesome, great. I pull out and I realize they didn't give me barbecue sauce. Okay, like obviously in the grand scheme of things, not even a big deal at all. Like doesn't even. But you know what? I love barbecue sauce, and it's always part of my routine. And so I had a moment. I can get aggravated, or I can just say, thank you, Lord. Like, this is inconvenient, and I'm going to give my inconvenience to you as a prayer for someone that needs it. And by God's grace, I actually had the grace to say that yesterday. I don't always have that grace, but that's the idea, is regardless of what you think about the situation, when you can identify that you're uncomfortable, okay, give that to the Lord, and that itself is a prayer that can benefit not only yourself but others. And through that spiritual benefit, there is great joy and freedom in a life that is that well surrendered to the Lord.
Yeah, and you're getting at, I think, what we were trying to communicate in the homily. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to the homily from this past weekend, really want to encourage you to go to our resources and the homily series and Suffering Matters. We try to communicate that point, but you're getting right at what redemptive suffering is. So there's a difference between just suffering and in its sake, and then allowing it to be redemptive suffering. And this past weekend we talked about Paul, how Paul expresses something that helps us get to the core of what redemptive suffering, physical suffering, could be. He says, like, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, right? This idea of how could Paul possibly rejoice in his suffering?
And he had some real sufferings, like severe beatings.
Yeah, almost died several
famine
times.
And all kinds of things.
But this idea of, like, Paul began to offer his suffering to the Lord, that the Lord may use it as the Lord wishes for his building up of the kingdom and for the greater good of the church and spreading of the gospel. So when Paul says, like, I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, Paul is articulating, my suffering no longer begins and ends with me. I have given this to the Lord, and the Lord has used it to affect other people. So now it has meaning, it has purpose. And so he's able to rejoice in it rather than just to complain in it. Like
there's purpose, and that's the key. And that's key here too, is that we're not just looking at the bright side of things, because that only lasts for so long when you look at the bright side. What we're doing is why we say transformative is because we're giving you purpose. Like there actually is a real effect whenever you give this suffering to the Lord on behalf of others. So, I mean, to me, that's just a lot more meaningful, more motivating. I mean, there's a reason, there's purpose. You're not just, sitting and waiting. You're not just a victim. Instead, now you're an agent.
Absolutely.
You're acting. You're an active participant.
And that kind of brings us to the cross. Like Jesus wasn't a passive victim on the cross. Like the cross is really our ultimate model for redemptive suffering. Jesus wasn't a passive victim on the cross. Like the cross wasn't done to him. Jesus actually actively embraced and took on the cross as an act of love because he knew what was going to happen in and through the cross for us. And so the cross was a gift to the Father on our behalf. And so this idea of being passively taking on suffering, we can, like you said, we can feel like we're a victim, and the fruit of being a victim is just resentment and bitterness and anger and frustration, and again, that stuff, it tends to be transmitted.
Yeah, and again, just going back to your question a few minutes ago was just this, what are the actual sufferings in our own parish, in our own experience, and we mentioned COVID, of course, but a lot of people don't realize there's even outside of that in our own Broussard community. I mean, we have people that are actually suffering with cancer right now, and we have people that are suffering with chronic pain, and etc. There's all kinds of, not to mention the emotional and spiritual sufferings, which we'll get to in the next weeks, but even just physical suffering that sometimes we don't realize the suffering that other people are enduring, and we kind of take that for granted. But with all that said, we only have a few more minutes, but I would like to maybe spend a little bit of time on just healing, because some people, especially those that are suffering, may say, you know what, I'm tired. Like I don't want to suffer anymore. And I don't know what the Lord's will for you is, whether you continue to be invited into that redemptive suffering purpose, or maybe the Lord's ready to heal you. And we sometimes take for granted, at least myself, that the Lord is the divine healer. That's one of his main titles in the Gospels, and we can pray for that. We can pray for that healing with boldness and with confidence and with great faith.
Sure. Yeah. To transition into that, just to clarify so for us to enter into redemptive suffering is when we unite our sufferings, when we offer our sufferings to Jesus. Like when we internally unite that suffering to his suffering. It's just a difference between I'm going to suffer alone. I can't do anything alone. I can't heal the world. I can't save souls. I can't forgive sinners. But when I offer what I'm experiencing, especially when we're talking about physical suffering, when I give that to Jesus, when I unite it to him, then he can do anything and everything with what I give him. So that's when it becomes redemptive, because he is using it, the Redeemer, the only one who can redeem the world, he is using it to magnify and glorify what he and only he can do. So uniting our sufferings to Jesus, Lord, I unite them to you. I give them to you. It allows them to be redeeming, and now all of a sudden they have hope. Now with the healing pieces, sometimes the Lord may allow me to continue to experience this suffering because I'm offering it up to him, and I'm being united in a particular way to his cross and his passion, and that's in a sense that's a gift, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes he chooses, like you said, to physically heal me, to relieve me of that suffering, and certainly, I certainly don't want to stop asking and praying for healing.
Yeah, so in other words, it's not a bad thing to pray for healing. Right. Some people may feel like, oh, well, I'm supposed to suffer, so I'm not going to ask for healing. No, in fact, you can do both at the same time. You can pray boldly for healing immediately right now, and to do that with perseverance.
Yeah, I'm thinking Bartimaeus. Jesus walked up to him. He cried out, um, Jesus. He was calling out Jesus, Jesus, and Jesus walked up and said, like, what do you want me to do for you?
Hmm.
He didn't say, I want you to help me keep being blind, because he just, I want
Heal
to
me.
see. Like, I want to.
I mean, there's the hemorrhaging woman, and there's just so many examples in the Gospels of people being healed, because that's what Christ came to do, to restore us to wholeness. So, yes, if you are physically suffering, it is a good and, in fact, encouraged and great practice to pray for healing boldly with confidence. I think we underestimate the power of the Lord, um, and then in the meantime, to give the rest to Jesus so that you can have purpose behind that suffering and find redemption. And ultimately, the guiding posts are faith, hope, and love. If you suffer with faith, hope, and love, and pray for healing with faith, hope, and love, you find transformation instead of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's an experience of the Lord either way. Whether the Lord like doesn't heal me, I'm still with Him in the suffering, and so I'm united. Nothing can separate me from the love of Christ. Whether it's like health of mind and body, or sickness, whether I'm suffering with Him or He heals me, I'm going to still rejoice and celebrate in the healing, or I'm just going to rejoice and celebrate in that I'm united with Him in a particular way.
Yeah. So, heavy topic, but next week we're going to be talking about spiritual suffering, and then the third week, emotional suffering. So, just to give y'all some kind of a roadmap of where we're headed. But again, heavy topic, but extremely relevant. And the whole point is just for us to find a little bit of hope and healing through these trying times. So,
Sure.
thanks for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing y'all next week.
Yeah, and if you weren't with us this past weekend, invite you to go back and listen to the homily, and then come join us this weekend at the parish Sacred Heart in Broussard. We'll continue week 2 of our preaching series. Invite friends, family who might find this relative to their lives. So enjoy being with you tonight. God bless.